What's going on, gamers? It's Phil H here from Beneath the Veil, and welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to do a follow-up to last week's video where I showed a bunch of alternate observer ward placements rather than just cliff warding. I just want to say a thank you to everybody who saw that video and subsequently subscribed. We got way more views than we would have ever anticipated for a channel that we only started a month ago. So thanks so much for all the support. Thank you for all the comments. We are steadily trying to improve things as we go along. So please bear with us on the journey. And in the meantime, I hope that the information is helpful. So this week I wanted to go over the next part of that whole sort of mini series that started from the 4-part Vision Masterclass. And today I want to go over efficiency with Sentry ward placements. The reason for that being is that Sentry wards are incredibly important, seeing as they are a limited resource in the game. You can only have a maximum stack of 10 at once, and they respawn. You get a new charge, rather, I think, every 2 minutes. So they are limited in how many you can have, so you do need to be as efficient as you possibly can be with them. And a trap that a lot of new players fall into is obviously just putting sentries on the same spot that they put an observer ward. The reason why this is poor is that it leaves a lot of gaps around it. So you'll see, as I alluded to in the video last week, so whenever I go to place a ward, you see 2 radii. So there's a radius here, which is where I can actually, place the ward. So I could place it here immediately without needing to move. So if I place outside of that, then I'll need to physically move to place it. You can see this other radius that is moving with the ward is actually the reveal range in this case of the observer. If I were to change that to a observer ward, you would see that radius gets much larger. Like I can put it by the stairs now. So that is the range of sight that a observer ward has, whereas this is the range of true sight that a sentry ward has. So you'll see if I place it on the cliff up here, I create huge gaps in my true sight detection. So this is something you need to be wary of, because when you're playing support against supports who don't understand this concept, you can sneak in vision in areas where they're trying to deward, and you can just basically play around them really easily. So this video is designed to help you be more efficient, so that you don't get punished like I punish other supports that ward and deward lazily. So one thing I just want to really quickly cover is that the reason why it's so important to be efficient with sentry wards is that players who play invis heroes are very intelligent about understanding how reveal works. So if I were to place a sentry ward down, this Sand King, if he were to use a sandstorm, I could very easily see him. If I were to dust him, however, yes, I can see him now, but the moment he uses any sort of dispel, he just dispels the dust, and now he's gone back to being invisible. So Sand Kings, I mean, you can do this with Ricky as well. Yeah, any hero that has a reliable form of invis, they will always benefit from carrying some sort of dispel, which makes using dust against them ultimately not viable, because so long as they've got that dispel in their back pocket, they can just dispel the dust straight away. So in this sort of a situation where you've got a Sand King with either a Yule's or a Lotus Orb, because those are the 2 most common ways that he'll dispel dust, you have to use a Sentry ward in that case, because no matter what he does, if he tries to go invis, he Lotus Orbs himself, I can still see him due to this. So this is why a concept like this is really important, and making sure that the sentry wards that you're using for vision purposes are being as efficient as possible, so that you have more charges of sentry wards to use in team fights when you need them. There will of course be games where this isn't relevant, but that's not what this video is designed for. So, as we did with the last video, we will start up in the dire safe lane, then we'll work ourselves into the dire jungle, we'll go through mid, work ourselves through the dire triangle, and then we'll sort of snake our way back through in reverse. So starting with this little area here, as I explained last week, this is one of the most sort of contested areas in the laning stage. So most new players will place a sentry ward over here. So that's just, the first level. As I explained last week, I often like to place one up here if I'm playing position 4, because it gives me a bit of reveal in lane as well. And it will hit this spot, as well as hitting some spots here. So you can see if I click on the ward, you can see the overall radius. Other spots to consider are here in the trees as well, if you want to see further down and also into the lane. Typically, if I'm wanting sentry wards in lane, say I'm playing against a weaver or something like that, then I'll tend to actually place sentry wards for them on the other side of the lane. Just because typically my enemy support will be commonly placing, sentries to counter my sentries, and we'll be looking in this area. So often I find more value in placing them on this side instead, but experiment in your games, find out what works for you, and I'll carry on with the main subject of this video. So in this sort of area here, so as I explained last week, the main purpose of placing a observer ward up on this cliff is to spot enemy rotations coming through sort of this area or along this way as well. So an alternate to that, as I explained, is that a support may want to place a ward here. And the way to counteract both of those at once is placing a sentry ward just here. So you'll see that if I were to then use Spell at Crystal Nova, I could check up here, as well as covering this spot. So you'll see the radius actually fits behind that cliff, as well as giving me vision over here. Other ones to consider, if you're playing safe lane Dire and you suspect that the enemy might be hiding wards back here in an attempt to siege, instead of doing the first level, which would just be placing it in the lane as well, I like to do little things like snake them in trees, and this is a common theme that you'll see from me, is that generally placing wards in trees, so either like here or here, you'll see that the radius of this one does actually hit most of the area except right behind the tower, but this one is overall a little bit safer, even though it is more exposed. A little ward here, although it can be seen from the support, if they have to run to this spot, because otherwise the tree blocks their vision. But yeah, that one is really good for getting into the lane as well, because it covers right to the far back of the lane. There's a ward like this, or a ward like this for that purpose. After that tower has fallen, so the tier 1, then typically what you'll want to do is, if you think about what the Radiant position 4 will want to do, they'll want to establish vision either here, or back here, or back here. So you'll see if you do, say I want to counteract this ward spot, right? What most new support players will do is they'll go, okay, well, I'll just throw a sentry ward on the spot that I want to deward. But what you're missing is you've got all of this vision radius, right? So a smart support will understand that if you've dewarded here, then you won't have vision back here, right? Because that's just where your true sight ends. So then they'll do things like simply just run past, and then they'll place an observer over here instead. And the neat spot about this is that if you're also being lazy and placing one up here, see that if I stand here, I'm not being hit, I'm not being hit. So you're creating a gap in your vision, which is why doing sentry wards like this is really bad. So what I will do instead, I will look to use the radius of my true sight, right? So my main goal is I want to cover this spot here, but I also want to cover back here if I can. So I'll move the radius of it until it's sitting just by the ramp, because that's where I want it to be. And then now I'm covering the spot here as well as the spot here. So no matter what the position 4 does, if they ward in any of this area, then I'm going to see it. Similarly, so say they want to place a ward here, right? Because this line here is the true sight of the outpost. So the outposts do actually provide true sight, which is why holding on to your outpost is really important, because not only it gives you a spot to teleport to, but it also gives you a bit of vision clear as well. So say they want to snake a ward in here that is just within the realms of your, just outside the realms of your outpost true sight. Then what you can do is you can look for a ward like this, right? So I'm trying to cover this spot up here. I'll just kill this one off. So as you can see here, I can start to mess around with the radius of this spell. If you look just here, this is what I use to mark where the end of the radius is. And you can get it really, really close to being able to fully cover. There is technically like this very small spot, but in a game where somebody's running in and quickly placing a ward, they're not often going to get those super slim spots. And if they do, well then fair play to them. But a ward like this will clear the high ground, as well as clearing most of the spots back here. As I gave as a little Easter egg in last week's video, if you want to cover this new ward spot as well as the cliff ward up here, then you can place a sentry ward just at the base of the stairs. And that will cover both of those spots really easily. So you see here, I've got true sight up here, as well as over here, and I've also got these stairs, which can be another like third less used spot. So yeah, while this reveal vision is very passive, it will see any invis heroes running up the stairs, which is probably the main reason that you'd want reveal here in the first place, is to spot rotations through here. So this does the same job while dewarding more areas. Otherwise, if you wanted to deward here and try and cover these spots at the same time, then you've got wards like this, which will start to, as you see. So something like that will just get me, you know, right up to this edge. If I hover over there, you know, right along that edge. So if they put one right on the edge there, you won't actually see it. That's why I prefer this one. And then what I'll do with this ward instead is I'll actually place it more like this. So I'll try and get reveal down into this area, just in case, you know, there's a Mirana on the other team or something like that, and a team fight breaks out and she just pops her ult. Then we've at least got a bit more useful vision, rather than if I were to ward here and, you know, here to cover that spot twice, I'm creating redundancies in my vision. And that's ultimately what you want to be doing, is mitigating redundancies so that you're getting more efficiencies as a result. So with this spot here, right? So, and this is always really good practice, is to just place a ward in that spot and then go, well, now what am I missing? So as you see, we've got these spots and this spot we can't see. And because of this ward, we've already got this, right? So we've got this huge Venn diagram overlap. So what I prefer to do instead is to place a ward further back here. You see we still have a bit of a Venn diagram going on between these two. You can see there's this little area. But as a result, I'm getting much more coverage. So if the enemy team were to infiltrate here and they decided that instead they want to place wards, you know, here or here, with that single ward, assuming they haven't dewarded, I've covered all of those spots, as well as I'll then have ways to clear this. Another just point that I should have brought up is that even if you don't have, you know, if you're playing a Shadow Shaman, Witch Doctor, Bane, 3 of the supports that come to mind at the moment, but if you're playing a support that doesn't have a vision clearing spell, like Freezing Field, which grants vision, what you can do instead is if you bind a hotkey to directional pathing, directional move, which I have as C in this case, what you can do is you can hold your hotkey and then right click, and you'll move straight towards an area. That, you know, so if I were to not press it, not hold the hotkey and then right click, I'd take whatever path I could to run to that area. If you hold directional path, it says go straight in that direction until you collide with something. The way you can use this for dewarding purposes is hold directional path and then click on the cliff, and then you can use the Tumblers toy to push yourself up. Let's say you have a Force Staff as well, because that's one of the most common support items that you'll have. Then what you can do is you can directional path, there we go, and then push yourself off. Or if you got really good at knowing the ranges, you could do something like that instead. But yeah, I mean, that's always good to know just as an escape as well, right? So if I'm being pursued, I can directional path and then push myself up. Similarly, if I need a quick escape, I can do stuff like that, right? Rather than running around. So yeah, directional pathing, really, really good in general. But especially if you don't have the means of clearing vision with a spell, just directional path and then Tumblers toy, or directional path for stuff. Really, really good. Okay, so that is the Dire jungle all covered. Let's go and run through mid now. There's, I mean, most new players, and this is a sound strategy, will just throw observer wards in the middle of the river, because you'll see both sides, right? So here, here, or here. This is sort of your level 1 deward. What these do leave you open to, right, is deeper wards. So say this spot, right, isn't covered right now. So if you know that they've got vision on your side of the river, then what you can look to do is do wards like this, for example. So if I place that there, you'll see that the vision radius, I've got pretty much all of my side of the river, as well as this covers up here. which I will mention when I get to the Radiant jungle. But that's something to keep in mind going into the mid game, is that you don't need to always just ward in the center of the river. Sometimes it is helpful if you know that like there's a potential team fight breaking out in a river, then you could place one down. But generally I'd wait until the team fight happens and then place it rather than preemptively placing it all the time. Okay, most common ward spot is up here, right? The other option that you have in this area is warding down here. So whenever I'm playing a dire support, what I'll try and do is place a ward like this, which then covers both spots, up here and over here. There is an argument for placing a sentry ward further back, right? Because then you could potentially, if they're trying to like block camps or something like that, you could get a little bit further vision. If you place it right, you see like a ward like that, will clear this spot, which is another ward spot. However, it still misses spots like this, which you'll want to deward anyway. And the most powerful reason to have Revelation or True Sight here is that you'll want the ability to see invis rotations coming up through here, right? So whether that be a Riki, Mirana, or a Nyx Assassin, somebody running through, you'll want the ability to see them rotate through, because while the Observer Ward will see all the way out here, your Sentry Ward won't actually see any invis heroes until they're at the stairs. So if you place it further back, you're obviously just limiting where that True Sight detection comes into place. And you can end up getting a core killed if they're farming this camp, for example, because by the time they realize somebody's here to kill them, it would be too late. Because like if you see a Nyx Assassin here and there's a hero here, you know, in the camp farming, doesn't really matter because they can impale you from, you know, this far away. So that's something to be aware of in this case, is that you do have to make compromises in certain places when it comes to Sentry Ward placement. But with this ward, you can cover your inefficiencies here. So in order to cover these 4 spots, all you do is place a Sentry Ward right in the middle. And that will cover all 4 spots very easily. Sometimes you'll get Sentry placements back here, Observer Ward placements back here rather. But typically what you'll end up with is a ward up here. So there's 2 Sentry Ward placements I would use. This one, which is nowhere near as common, because typically they don't get a whole lot of information except for flank rotations from an Observer Ward here. Whereas if they place an Observer Ward over here, they will see a lot more, because typically this is a higher traffic area in general, and an Observer Ward placed over here will see right down into this area as well. So what I prefer to do when it comes to Revelation is place a Sentry Ward around these trees. So something like this, and if I quickly kill that one off, you'll see that now I see up here, I see all the way over here, as well as these spots. This doesn't cover these ward spots back here, but again, this is a similar sort of spot to this one in that it doesn't give you as much information as Sentry Wards, you know, here, here, or here. So I tend to not prioritize these 2 spots as much, because most players will just greedily go for the cliff. But that's something to be aware of. If you feel like they've got vision in this area and you've done, you know, this ward and you've seen nothing, then it's probably one of these 3 spots. So you could place something like this, which would then cover all 4 of those potential areas. So moving on to the Radiant safe lane. As I mentioned last week, there is this stretch here, which is really important to control. The most common sentry spot to try and control all of this vision at once is placing a sentry just back here. So you'll see that it gets, for the most part, the vast majority of vision that you'll see along this line. However, some alternate spots to consider are one that I quite like if I'm playing Radiant Pulse 5 is throwing one down here, because it will still give me the ability to deward this spot here, as well as being slightly hidden behind trees, so it's less likely to be seen by the enemy. Otherwise, if I'm playing Radiant and I want to try and clear some potential vision that they've got over here, I'll place a ward back here, because while I think it just misses this spot here, yeah, it's a bit touch and go, my main priority is trying to potentially clear vision that might be back here from an observer, and then also checking this sort of area too. There are other things to be said about checking for unblocking camps, and I think that's a whole video that we'll do on its own about the ways that you can block camps and how to unblock camps, because yeah, there's some minute details in there that will just make this video far too long. So I'll do that in a separate video, but for the means of just counterboarding, other spots to consider. So in a similar vein, if you think that the enemy might have vision back here, then I'll try and hide something like in the trees. And you'll see that this will give like vision here, which is a pretty common spot, as well as like right behind where the tower normally is. Otherwise, you could look for something like this. Where is it? There we go. It will technically be seen if they've got an observer ward here as well. But most of the time, it will just be an observer on its own, just placed back here. But that's just good to know, in case they are dewarding at the same time that they're placing wards. Other ones, so just a good general all-purpose deward. Just slap it right in the middle of these two spawn boxes. That will give you, coverage along here, some deward potential back here, as well as deward here. But if you want to try and cover the spot and the cliff at once, you can do a deward like this. So there you go. I was just waiting for the radius of the last one to expire. So yeah, you can place something around here, and that will cover your spot here and up here, which means that when you're dewarding in this area, you can be a little bit more efficient. So let's say, for example, that you had this ward down already, and you've just had a core that's died here. So you know that they've got some sort of vision that isn't up here, because you can clear that with that sentry ward. So your next solutions would be, well, it might be somewhere along here, or it could be over here, right, by the medium camp. So there's two wards that I would like to use in this case. So one of them would be a ward like this. So the reason for that is that you want to make sure that you're clearing this cliff as well, because it could be over here, which is why they're being seen here. So a ward like that will cover this sort of area, and then you've got a ward like this. You can see that you've got a nice little series of Venn diagrams, and you can start to push this one up, something like this. And now you've got coverage all in this area, and most importantly, as we mentioned for the dire triangle, you've got coverage with true sight going up these stairs as well. So if there's somebody invisible, as soon as they wander under any observers that you might have along here, they will be revealed while they're still in river, which gives any cores that might be farming this camp, most notably, or this camp over here, plenty of time to retreat. Rather than if you place this too far back, then they wouldn't be seen until they're at the top of the stairs, and in the case of them being here, that's just instant death. Okay, so this sentry ward is one way to see up here. The other thing, as I mentioned last week, if they place a observer here instead, because that's a nice way to get around a sentry that's up here, right? If you place one up here, then you're creating holes. So what if they place one here instead? See, if you've used this ward to cover this, and you can be confident that there's not a ward there. Let me just wait for that to expire. There we go. So this is one of the few cases where I would advocate for putting it where you think the ward might be. The reason for that is that if they've warded along the stairs or even below the stairs, out of range of where a sentry ward here would pick up, like say they've put a ward just down here, right, to try and see people rotating in on the tower, then a ward here will actually see those observers. It will miss this spot though, so that's something to be wary of. But you'll get around to that would be something like this. So you're always playing a series of compromises. So you could place something like this ward here, right, which would cover this spot, but if I take that one out, you would miss this area. However, what this ward gives you is control here and here and here and here. Doesn't give you control up here, but our final ward for this area will. So the final ward that I like to place in this area will be something like this. And you can see with the series of Venn diagrams that we're creating that I've now got true sight vision in here. I've got true sight vision all around here. My only hole at the moment is in here. So that's something to be just aware of, is that, you know, I've committed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to this area. So you do really have to pick and choose based on where heroes are dying, where you think vision might be, because it's just not feasible to keep sentry wards up in every single area of the map and have sentry wards to play with when you're dealing with invisible heroes that have, you know, a skill-based invisibility rather than item-based invisibility, because an item-based invisibility dust will always work against them. Because with a glimmer, you can just simply wait it out. With a shadow blade, the second you reveal them, if they use a dispel item, it will actually break the invisibility. So if I were to go invis right, and then the moment I pop manta, it stops my invis. So for any hero that's using invisibility-based items, you generally don't have to worry about keeping sentries. You keep dust for them, because the moment they use something to try and dispel it, they're going to break their own invisibility. That's just the way that items like Shadow Blade work. Glimmer is a bit of an exception, but there's a 6-second cooldown. The only argument would be, what if they have Shadow Amulet? Then what they could do is dispel it, and then they could immediately self-cast Shadow Amulet again. Yes, that's true, but they also can't move. So, you know, there's things to be considered there in terms of how much you really need a sentry in cases like that. But yeah, so as we move on to the Radiant Triangle. So most common sentry spot, right, will be straight on the cliff. By now, you should all understand that this is bad because you create all of these gaps in vision, right? And if I'm like 20 minutes into a game and I've learned the behavior of my enemy support, and this is the only way that they deward, I will just straight up come and place observers. Like, I won't even try and deward first like you normally should, just because I'll have the confidence that they're not going to place their observers correctly. And since it's a limited resource, I'll normally get full duration observers anywhere like here or here or along here. So what you should be doing instead is that what I like to do to cover this spot is place a sentry ward in lane. Reason for that is sentry wards in lane are just strong anyway. So I get all of this true sight coverage outside of my tower, which provides true sight. And then for this spot, I like to do a ward back here. The reason for that is that, yes, it still covers, but I do get a bit of sentry coverage down here as well. So if a fight does break out and then somebody's trying to retreat, then typically if they don't have coverage up here anyway, or say if they're rushing back into their own vision, as I pursue them up, I'll place a sentry ward here with the eventual goal of clearing this once they've fled the entire area. With a ward here, 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 or here, here, like I explained, typically if I'm playing Dire, I'll like a ward here when I'm trying to do Roshan. I'll snake one here in the sort of early to mid game when I run through mid. Or I'll snake one over here after I've taken the tier 1 top as an alternate to this cliff, right? Because you'll note that if I pop one up here, I don't see any of those spots. So there is one sentry ward that counteracts all of those, and it's right here. So as you can see with the range, it covers every single spot. Yeah, just really, really solid ward in general. And then some of you may be asking, well, that's all well and good, Phil, but what happens with this ward? So there's 2 main ways that I like to deward this cliff, depending on what stage of the game I'm in. If I'm in the early game, then I'll prefer to place a ward like this, because this will cover any fights that break out around the secret shop, as well as will cover any fights that break out along the stairs, and give me a little bit of coverage coming into here. As we get later into the game, Roshan is a major objective, right? So what's going to end up happening is that you're going to get more fights breaking out in that sort of area, in which case vision that's more in this area is going to help more. So let me just grab you an Aether Lens quickly, just to show that Sentry wards and all items are affected by cast range as well. So you'll see that if I stand here, I can place a Sentry directly on top of on top of the Sand King right now, right? If I don't have that Aether Lens, put myself in the same spot, you will see that, let's just drag that out, that suddenly my range drops. So now I can only place it here. While this might seem scary to try and place a Sentry so deep, if you've got a Aether Lens, then you can normally get away with once that's, there we go. So I could sneak one all the way over here without needing to commit my body to that area. And if I just move the Sand King out the way, you'll see that I still get vision up here, which is what I'm trying to clear in the first place. So yeah, in the sort of early to mid game, I'll place one here. As Roshan starts to be contested more, I'll place one here instead, once I've got an Aether Lens or something like that. But yeah, you'll start to learn and create patterns for dewarding as you do it more and more. And yeah, just always being aware of where you can place sentries efficiently, where your vision is covered. If you ever want to check, just hold Alt, and you can see where you've got things that are overlapping and where things aren't. So that, you know, if you feel like you've cleared an area and then the enemy are still just confidently walking into areas and killing your cores, then that is a prompt for you as a support player to consider, maybe there's a gap in my vision that I didn't account for, and start going through it that way. Just as a final note, let me just TP over here. So I did show you in my vision video last week that you've got these spots, right, where you've got these little eye symbols similar to the exact same icon that's on the cliffs. So you can place sentries up here and observers. The issue is, however, is that you can't, if you don't have a vision clearing ability, you have no way to get up here because it's considered the end of the map. So if I spam my Tumblers toy, it's just going to push me off every time. So that is something to be aware of, is that if you don't have a vision granting ability, you do have to commit a sentry ward up here to clear these spots if the enemy are, you know, warding this area that you suspect. Otherwise, you can very easily, if you've got a vision granting ability, you can place a sentry on the low ground and then use a spell on the high ground to clear it. That is why I would advise going to watch my 4-part vision masterclass I made for the channel, because that will go through every single hero ability. It's not just support heroes, it is also core heroes. So it is good to know as a support player what cores can actually help you do this job as well in, you know, situations like this. If you've got a Bat Rider, you could just ask them to throw a couple of charges of sticky napalm up there, and that will grant you enough vision to take out any vision that they might have up there. That's all for this week. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got value out of this video, please consider subscribing as well. And besides that, I'll see you in the next video.